Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere cold, damp, and slightly moldy. Welcome to the not-so-bountiful fields of medieval Europe. Picture this. You wake up in a one-room cottage with a leaking thatch roof. There's a sour smell in the air. Not quite manure, not quite soup. Your stomach's been grumbling since yesterday, but the bread ran out 3 mornings ago. You reach for the grain sack under the bed. It's empty. Again. The truth is, you probably wouldn't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge outside with bare feet into a misty morning. The dirt path has turned to mud after another night of rain. Chickens huddle under the cart like little feathered secrets. No eggs today. They're as hungry as you are. You don't remember the last time you had something filling. That crust of barley bread from a week ago? Or was it the acorn mash your neighbor shared in exchange for a broken spoon? Hunger in medieval life wasn't a tragic exception. It was more like a background hum, the way some folks now live with a leaky faucet or an eternally blinking Wi-Fi router. There's always some problem, and sometimes that background hum swells into a scream. Your village, like so many scattered across Europe, depends entirely on a narrow strip of cultivated land. Wheat, rye, barley, that's your holy trinity. If the harvest is good, everyone feasts. If it's bad, well, you hope you liked that last crust. The funny, not funny thing is, famine didn't just mean nothing to eat. It meant nothing to hope for. Your calendar, like your life, was tied to the seasons. Sow, tend, harvest, repeat. One bad harvest. And the cycle doesn't just break, it turns into a spiral. You're already rationing by Candlemas, praying the few turnips you've got won't rot before Lent. Historians still debate how common famine was across the entire continent. Some argue it struck a region every 10 years. Others say it was more like every 5. Either way, the math is not on your side. And when it comes, it doesn't arrive with a dramatic announcement. No trumpet, no red sky, no brace yourself moment. It arrives like silence. Fewer carts on the road. A mill that grinds less and less. A mother who starts giving her portion to the children. A priest who doesn't preach about abundance anymore. You try to forget the hunger by working. You and your neighbors patch roofs, clean ditches, mend broken tools. But you all move slower. Your muscles ache in weird ways. Even your thoughts are sluggish, like your brain's trudging through the same mud as your feet. Someone jokes that they found a rabbit, but it was already bones. Another says they saw a merchant pass through who still had wine. No one laughs. You're all saving energy now. Even the gossip has thinned. You remember when the baker's oven burned bright every dawn. Now, its mouth is closed and cold. The baker moved 2 villages away last winter. Said the grain was better there. His wife didn't go with him. You've heard rumors she starved, but rumors have become the new currency, so who knows? Strangely, you find yourself thinking a lot about smell. How bread used to make the whole village feel safe. How your mother's stew had a scent like rosemary and onions. Now the only thing that fills your nose is damp straw and your neighbor's damp feet. Some say this kind of hunger builds character. You're not sure what kind of character, but if it's the kind that imagines roasted turnips while staring at a wet log, then congratulations. You're thriving, and yet there are moments of strange beauty. The sky at dusk is clearer. You hear the owls more now that the children cry less at night. Someone sang yesterday, just a few bars of an old planting tune. It was haunting in a good way, like the earth whispering, "Not yet." You're still here. One of the older villagers says he remembers a time just like this, decades ago. Says they boiled leather belts and made soup from cattails. He says it with a grin, like it's a badge of honor. But you notice he's gotten thinner too. His stories used to last longer. Hunger changes the way time moves. Days stretch like melted wax. Nights feel longer because you wake up constantly. Not from dreams, but from the gnawing emptiness. You even dream about chewing. Once you woke up with a mouthful of blanket, but you're not alone. That's something. The village may be tired, but it's still breathing. Someone leaves a tiny pile of lentils by your doorstep. No note, just quiet kindness. You save them in a cracked pot, almost too beautiful to eat. Almost. And tomorrow, maybe someone will say the monks at the edge of the woods are sharing soup. Maybe the Lord will release some of the hoarded grain. Maybe a miracle, or at least a dry patch to sleep on. Maybe. But tonight, you settle under your blanket, which smells like sheep and ash. You pull it close, listen to the quiet drip from the roof, and tell yourself, just make it to morning. The next morning, you wake to the sound of boots on wet earth. Not the heavy tread of a nobleman's horseman, just your neighbor trudging to the edge of the field with a spade and a sigh. He's not digging to plant anything. Not really. The soil isn't ready. The soil hasn't been ready in years. That's the thing. This land, once generous, is tired. And it's not just in your village. Across Europe, fields are weary from the same old routines. You plant wheat, harvest wheat, and then you plant wheat again. Over and over. It's like asking the same question and expecting a different answer every time. See, crop rotation, at least the kind that gives the land a break, wasn't widely practiced for much of the medieval period. Some places did it better than others. But for most smallholders like you, the idea of leaving a strip of land empty for a year feels like choosing hunger on purpose. You can't afford that luxury. Historians still argue whether commoners even understood soil exhaustion. Maybe they noticed their barley didn't grow as tall. Maybe they thought the saints were angry again. Either way, the result was the same. Shrinking yields, year after year, as if the earth itself had grown stingy. And don't get started on the tools. That wooden plow. It's better at making mud pies than breaking tough ground. Iron-tipped versions exist, but you don't have one. You borrow, and only when someone else isn't using theirs. The oxen are tired. They've been walking in circles for months. And your back? Let's not even talk about your back. Then there's the weather. It always seems to rain when you don't need it and stay dry when you beg it to weep. But we'll get into that stormy mess in the next stretch. Today, you're focused on planting something. Anything. You drop seeds into the soil, careful not to waste even one. Each is like a prayer with a hard shell. But deep down, you know that this dirt isn't what it used to be. The meadows you remember from childhood, those lush green stretches where geese waddled and kids played in spring mud, are now patchy, brittle. You'd swear the grass has given up too, and you can't just expand. The forest is the Lord's. The pasture belongs to the abbey. You're boxed in like a goat in a pantry. Your ancestors might have had it better, ironically. A few hundred years back, there was still land to clear, forests to tame, rivers to divert. But now, most of it's claimed. The medieval land boom is over, and the leftovers are, well, you're standing in them. Once, someone suggested using manure to revive the soil. Everyone laughed, not because it was a bad idea, but because no one had any manure to spare. The livestock are barely eating, so they're barely contributing. What little they produce gets used right away, often smeared straight onto the seed rows like desperate frosting. There's also a tradition, more rumor than science, that if you bury a blessed object in the ground before planting, the crops grow better. Last year, your cousin tried it with a tiny bone fragment he swore was from St. Bartholomew. His field flooded 2 weeks later. Still, the belief remains. Some folks bury silver coins. Others use scraps of holy text. One neighbor even tried singing hymns while sowing. Can't hurt, right? Especially when nothing else is working. You pause to stretch, your joints popping like kindling. Across the field, a woman in a patched brown cloak is whispering something over her seeds. Maybe a blessing, maybe a bargain. And there's the rub. When the land fails, people start looking for magic, or blame. But that's a conversation for a darker day. Right now, you press a final seed into the earth and smooth the dirt over like tucking in a sleeping child. You know you won't see anything sprout for weeks, if at all, but there's still something sacred in the gesture. As you head back home, you pass a boy chasing a crow. The bird has stolen something shiny. Bread crust? A button? Hard to tell. But you envy its energy. Later, you sit beside the fire pit. It's cold, and there's no fire, just a memory of warmth. You chew a bit of bark someone swore softens with spit. It doesn't, but it keeps your jaw busy. Someone once joked that peasants spent half their lives chewing and the other half praying it's food. But here's the quiet part. No one says aloud, you're afraid of the future, not because it might be worse, but because it might be the same. This slow erosion of hope, this dirt that gives less, this aching body, this endless need to stretch one small loaf among 6 mouths. Your grandmother used to say the land listens, that if you speak kindly to it, it might one day remember how to give. You wish you believed her, but for now, you listen to the quiet wind, the soft groan of trees beyond the fields, the distant splash of a goose that somehow still finds joy in muddy water, and you think, just one good harvest. One. You wouldn't even ask for more. The rain doesn't ask your permission. It starts with a soft hiss in the thatch roof above your bed, then a drip, then 10. Soon the whole cottage sounds like it's wrapped in wet paper. You pull your cloak tighter, even though it's already damp from yesterday. Outside, the path you walk to the fields is gone, turned to pudding. You stare at the fire pit, still cold. The thing about medieval rain, especially the kind that overstays its welcome, is that it isn't gentle. It's not poetic. It's not the kind that inspires love letters or wistful songs. It ruins things, like your roof, your grain, your patience. You'd think rain would be a good thing for crops. And sure, sometimes it is. But too much? That's a different beast entirely. And lately, too much has been the only setting. Historians still debate how sudden the climate shift was, but sometime between the 13th and 14th centuries, Europe started to get chillier. Not glacier and mammoth cold, but just cold and wet enough to make life miserable. This period, nicknamed the Little Ice Age, turned once reliable seasons into wild guesses. Spring forgot to show up. Summer came dressed as autumn. And winter, well, winter got smug. You step outside and see your neighbor's thatch sagging, almost touching the ground. Their firewood is wet. Yours too. Everyone's is. The river's overflown again. The grain stores smell sour. You think you saw a fish swimming near the bakery yesterday. And this isn't just your unlucky village. Across the continent, entire regions are rotting. Crops sprout, grow an inch, then drown. Wheat heads grow gray and slouch like they've given up. Mold creeps in like an uninvited guest who starts redecorating. People try all sorts of things. Cover the crops with blankets. Burn incense in the fields. One particularly hopeful fellow tried building a miniature wooden roof over his beans. It collapsed in 2 hours. In good weather, grain is life. In bad weather, it's a sponge. And sponges make terrible meals. Your lord naturally isn't worried. He's got grain from last year. Tucked in dry cellars, guarded by a dog the size of a pony, and 3 surly men who don't smile unless someone drops dead. The rest of you? You're on what's generously called reduced portions. And let's talk about those portions. A medieval peasant needs calories. Lots of them. You work from dawn to dusk. You're not sipping tea in a garden. You're hauling, chopping, planting, grinding, lifting. But when the weather ruins the crop, your meals shrink to a handful of boiled peas if you're lucky. Or barley water so thin you can see the bowl's bottom before your spoon even dips in. The rain doesn't just ruin food. It ruins hope. You start to doubt everything. Is the land cursed? Did someone forget a festival? Is this because the baker swore last week? And because this is medieval Europe, someone always whispers, which? We'll get there later. For now, it's the rot that gets to you. Your neighbor had barley sacks under her bed. She didn't notice the mildew until it was too late. They opened one up and the smell drove two men outside, gagging. She cried, not because of the smell, but because that was supposed to feed her family through spring. And mold doesn't travel alone. It brings friends, rats, beetles, tiny worms that wriggle in flour bins like they own the place. You've picked them out of your dough before. You've learned to just close your eyes and chew. Someone in the village remembers a time when the sun stayed up for weeks. Fields rippled with wheat like golden oceans. People sang as they worked. They still went hungry, but less so. That was before the wet years, before the gray sky became a ceiling nobody could lift. Now, even the birds look hungry. And the chickens? They've stopped laying. You caught one pecking at mud, as if pretending it was grain. It clucked sadly and walked away. Historians still argue how much of the weather pattern was natural and how much was worsened by volcanic eruptions or sunspot cycles. But to you, all that science talk is meaningless. What matters is that it keeps raining, that nothing stays dry, that bread is turning into luxury, and that when the sun does peek through the clouds, it feels like a trick. You lie in bed that night, listening to water drip from the rafters. You wonder if the sky even remembers how to be blue. If maybe somewhere there's a place where the ground is dry, the bread is warm, and the chickens don't cluck like they're apologizing. And tomorrow, you'll go out again. You'll check the field. You'll poke the grain heads with your finger and pretend you don't already know the answer. The mill hasn't turned in days. Not because it's broken, though that's always a possibility, but because no one has anything to grind. The last sack of grain passed through 3 days ago, and you heard the miller took half of it as payment. His rules, his stone, his terms. You sit on a splintery bench outside the chapel, chewing on the heel of bread someone traded you for a handful of nails. It's mostly crust, mostly hard, and mostly yours. The problem isn't just the weather or the soil or the rats, it's the people. Not in a villainous, mustache-twirling way, but in the way that scarcity makes everyone a little smaller inside. When there's not enough to go around, those who have more often keep it. And in medieval Europe, grain was power. Not swords, not land, not titles, grain. Your local lord, he has barns, big ones, dry ones. You saw them when you were younger, stacking hay for a festival. Stone walls, thick doors, guards who look like they've never missed a meal. They say the grain inside could feed the village 3 times over, but it won't. Because the Lord's grain isn't for eating, it's for trading, for power plays, for favors owed and alliances kept. In famine, even charity becomes strategy. You remember last month when a traveling merchant came through. He had dried fish, raisins, some flour. But the prices? Ridiculous. A whole hen for a pouch of grain. A daughter for 2 sacks. Someone made the trade. You try not to think about who. Historians still argue whether medieval lords were truly indifferent or just trapped in their own systems of control. Maybe both. But what's clear is this. When the hunger grows, generosity shrinks. And then come the riots. Not the kind you see in dramatic paintings. No torches, no shouting mobs. It starts smaller. A whisper in the tavern. A glance between hungry mothers. A man who accidentally drops his load of firewood in front of a guard. Last year, someone broke into the manor's outer storeroom. They took barley and left a token. An old shoe, a sprig of rosemary. The implication was, we're stealing, but politely. The punishment was not polite. You were there when they found the boy, tied to the post by the chapel, wrists bruised, eyes wide. They made him confess even though he hadn't. He confessed anyway. He was 12. He didn't eat for a week after, not by punishment, just because there wasn't anything left. And then there are the millers. Oh, the millers. If you ever want to see suspicion wear a human face, look at a hungry village watching a man in charge of measuring grain. He says it was a bad season for grinding. He blames the stones, the water levels, the peasants for bringing poor quality sacks. But somehow he's still chewing, still rosy-cheeked, still managing. You've heard tales of millers who added flour from powdered bark, who skimmed a scoop from every customer, who weighed the sacks with damp stones to adjust for moisture. And when caught, they always have a story, always a cousin to feed, always an excuse. Your friend Thomas once tried to take his own grain to another village's mill, 4 hours away, by foot. He made it back limping, flourless, and with a bruise the size of a cabbage on his back. Turns out this village doesn't like exporting their hunger, so you return to the same man, the same smirk, the same too light sack. There's an odd tradition in your village. If you see the miller praying at dawn, it's going to be a bad week. It means he's either feeling guilty or asking forgiveness in advance. Still, the church tells you to obey. Hunger is a test, God's will, a chance for your soul to shine while your stomach sulks. The priest's sermon last week was about gluttony. You remember sitting there, chewing on your sleeve, wondering if he was joking. He wasn't. Ironically, the only one eating well lately is the monastery goose. Fat, smug, waddling like a tiny lord in feathers. You've considered goose thoughts you shouldn't. So has everyone else. But despite it all, you share. Not because it's easy, not because it's noble, but because it's the only thing left to do. A neighbor's child cries. You pass her your last piece of dried apple. You watch her hold it like treasure. You wonder if she'll eat it or save it to smell later. And that, more than grain, more than riot, more than sermon, is what defines this famine. The quiet decisions people make when no one's looking. You walk home in the rain again. Your shoes fall apart a little more. Your heart does too, but you're still upright, still chewing. And tomorrow, maybe, someone else will look at you with the same kindness. The granary smells like rot and hope, mostly rot. You're helping a neighbor sweep out the corners, though neither of you has anything to store. There's a crusted line along the base of the wall where the last sacks sat, grain so damp it sprouted in the bag before the rats got to it. This is what food storage looks like in your world, drafty, dark, and nearly useless when it matters most. See, storing food in medieval times wasn't as simple as keep it dry. You had to outsmart moisture, bugs, thieves, mold, and sheer bad luck, all with tools no more advanced than a wooden shovel and a prayer. And in wet years like this, even the prayers feel soggy. Most villages have a communal granary, a holdover from a time when people believed sharing was safer than hoarding. That ideal faded sometime after the third winter in a row when the communal part became more about who had a key. Historians still argue how organized medieval storage systems really were. Some say there were written ledgers, scheduled inspections, rotation methods. Others point to, well, your granary, where half the roof is patched with old tunics and you swear you saw a cat walk in fat and come out skinny. You spot a bag in the corner, old, split open, contents green with mold. A few kernels cling to the dry side like survivors of a shipwreck. You don't even bother collecting them. Too risky. Mold sickness is real. And nothing says bad week, like a vomiting household, when there's no food to recover with. Your own home has a storage system too. A ceramic jar buried halfway into the ground. You keep your most precious dried beans in there, wrapped in cloth. You check it every morning, even when you know it's untouched. You tell yourself the beans will grow again, that they'll remember how. Once, someone in the village suggested building an underground cold chamber, something clever with stones and airflow. It worked for a season. Then came the rats. Big ones, bold. One of them stole a candle from a sleeping child's hand. So now, most people store their food high or hidden, tied in cloth sacks behind rafters, buried in clay pots in the garden. A few even try to hang dried meat from the ceiling. That is, until it rains and the smokehouse drips like a weeping ghost. Oh, and then there's the weevils. You've met them. You've chewed them. You've told yourself they're protein. They wriggle in flour, hide in grain, and sometimes, just to be cruel, wait until after baking to show up in your bread. Crunch. You've learned to sniff flour before using it. It's not a reliable test, but it makes you feel in control, like a chef. A very sad, very hungry chef. There's a superstition in your village. If you whisper to the weevils and ask them politely to leave, they'll go. Someone tried it last week. Loudly. With incense. The grain still moved. Food preservation was supposed to help. Salted meats, dried fruits, pickled vegetables. Great in theory. But salt is expensive. Fruit barely grows. And pickling requires jars you don't have. Someone once said the Romans had perfect grain silos, that they buried amphorae and layered grain with ash. Sounds brilliant. Too bad you're not Roman, or rich, or able to find amphorae that aren't currently being used to plug a leak. And then there's fire. More than one family has lost their stores to sparks. A knocked-over lantern, a cooking fire that got greedy. You hear the stories quietly, passed along with hushed tones and tight lips. Nobody wants to admit they cried over a pile of blackened oats. But they did. And not just for the food, for the effort, the weeks of waiting, of watching, of guarding, all undone in minutes. That's the worst part about storage. It reminds you just how fragile everything is. Even the church tries to help. Sort of. The priest talks about faith feeding the soul. You try not to imagine how crunchy that soul must be. He's not cruel, just well-fed. You once saw the inside of the Abbey storeroom, clean, lined with stone bins, grain stacked in layers like gold bars. They say it's for the sick, the poor, the truly desperate. But nobody knows what qualifies. You've never seen anyone get a full sack from there. A handful, maybe. And even that came with a lecture. You think about all the clever ways people try to stretch what they have. Roasting barley to make coffee. Boiling pebbles with herbs for flavor. Mixing ground acorns into dough. It all sounds creative. Until you're the one eating it. Your stomach growls as you sweep. It echoes in the empty granary. You laugh. Quietly. Because even your hunger has developed a sense of humor. Someone pokes their head in, asking if you've seen any usable sacks. You hand over a torn one without thinking. That was your last spare. Doesn't matter. It's almost dinner time. Which means you'll sit in front of a fireless hearth, chew something chewy, and tell yourself tomorrow's soup might have something floating in it besides boiled grass. And when you lie down, you'll dream of full shelves, of warm porridge, of bread that doesn't squish under your fingers or break your teeth, of a place where granaries hold not just food, but the memory of security. The animals are quieter now. That might not seem important, but it is. You're used to the clatter and cluck, the bleats and moos that form the sleepy soundtrack of village mornings. But lately, the cows are listless. The goats bleat less. Even the pigs, those noisy little beggars, grunt with less enthusiasm, because they're hungry too. When famine hits, it doesn't stop at your table. It seeps into the troughs, the haylofts, the empty feed bins. And when your animals suffer, you lose more than meat. You lose milk, eggs, warmth, and work. It starts slowly. First, you run out of grain husks, so you feed the cows old thatch, then moss, then weeds. You saw someone trying to convince a sheep to eat boiled cabbage root last week. The sheep just stared. The village used to share grazing land, a wide stretch where cows munched and children chased geese. Now it's muddy, patchy, and overpicked. You see ribs pressing through fur, noses snuffling in mud for anything edible. It's a buffet of nothing. And the milk. Oh, the milk. You used to drink warm milk in the morning. Just a cup, but it made everything feel possible. Now your cow hasn't given more than a few spoonfuls in days. Her udders hang limp. Her eyes are dull. She's not sick, just underfed. And scared. Historians still debate how central livestock were to daily nutrition. Some say they were luxury, others a lifeline. But for you, the loss is deeply personal. That cow has a name. You talk to her more than you talk to most humans. And now she stares at you like she's asking for something you can't give. Cheese-making used to be a community joy. On good days, the village smelled of sour whey and wood smoke. Women gathered to curdle and strain, to wrap wheels in cloth and stack them in cool corners. Those wheels were hope, preserved protein, ready for winter. But now, cheese is a memory. Butter is a joke. And eggs? The hens are molting from stress, hiding under carts, laying nothing but excuses. You try new tricks. You feed the goat boiled nettles. You massage the cow's sides like the old woman taught you. You hang herbs in the barn rafters for luck, but luck doesn't eat, and neither do you. You once read, well, we're told, that some cultures believe cows can feel sorrow. You believe it now. She leans into you as you brush her flank, like a child trying not to cry. There's an old man in the village, a quiet one with a crooked back and 3 chickens he treats like royalty. He talks to them every day. Lately, he's been giving them the last of his oats. Says eggs are coming. They're not. You suspect he knows. Someone in the next village slaughtered their last ox last week. Used to be a prized beast. Thick-necked, patient, clever with pulling carts. Now, it's soup. Not even good soup. Just fatty and thin and kind of sad. And yet no one blames them. Hunger eats morals. You can forgive a lot when your children cry themselves to sleep. There's a whispered tale of a woman in the hills who trains dogs to find edible roots. She feeds them better than herself. People scoff, but no one really laughs. Not anymore. You'd train a hedgehog to play the lute if it meant a meal. Historians still argue whether communities rationed livestock fairly or selfishly. Your village tries. There are meetings, agreements, plans to pool resources. But when the hay runs out and the winter drags on, the sharing shrinks. Quietly, gently, like the mooing of your cow. There was a time when the sound of animals was constant. It meant life. Now silence creeps in. The barn creaks. The coop rustles. But it's not the same. You used to save milk for holidays. Make cream curd for weddings. Now you look at the churn and wonder if it's worth cleaning. You remember one spring, 3 years ago, when the butter was so fresh it squeaked against the knife. You licked the blade clean. It felt like joy. Now your meals are mostly plant-based, not by choice. You chew boiled greens and call it stew. You dream of cheese, and yet you still visit the barn each morning. You pet your cow's head. You check the trough. You tell her she's beautiful. You thank her, even when she has nothing left to give. Because sometimes in famine, it's not the food that sustains you. It's the ritual, the rhythm, the quiet moments of care when everything else feels like collapse. So tonight you wrap a worn blanket around your cow. She doesn't resist. You both sit in the straw, not speaking, just breathing, just enduring, together. Dinner tonight is bark stew. You don't mention that out loud. No one does. Everyone pretends it's herbal broth or forest soup or something less humiliating. But you know what it is. Stripped tree bark, soaked and boiled until soft. If you close your eyes and use your imagination, it tastes almost like nothing, which is better than it tasting like despair. You ladle it carefully, not because it's precious, but because spilling it would mean the effort was wasted. And effort, these days, is a form of currency. The table's quiet. Your cousin chews slowly. Your younger brother just stares into the bowl. He's stopped asking what's for supper. You think he's starting to understand. The truth is, medieval famine cuisine isn't romantic. It's not artisanal. It's desperate. And as the hunger drags on, what qualifies as food begins to bend. First, you stretch your flour with crushed peas, then with dried moss, then with chalk if you're daring or foolish. A neighbor swears by boiled shoe leather, claims it loosens up nice after a few hours. You tried it once. It did loosen. So did your stomach. There's an old recipe going around, porridge made from powdered bones. Someone says it came from the monks. Someone else says it came from a battlefield. Either way, it's gritty and awful, and you wonder how many ingredients were ever properly identified. You know someone who tried to ferment grass. It foamed. That was the most exciting thing that happened all week. Historians still argue over how far peasants really went in their search for calories. Some documents mention lichen cakes, others describe boiling thistles and goosefoot leaves. A few, more questionable, refer to long pork, though no one dares say those words above a whisper. You once heard a story about bread made with clay. It's not a myth. A town over, they did it. Mixed earth with rye flour, baked it flat, and rationed it like gold. It cracked your teeth and tasted like regret, but it filled your belly just enough to sleep. That's the trade-off now. Nutrition for numbness. If it stops the ache, even briefly, it's worth it. You're not eating to live anymore. You're eating to survive the next 4 hours. Still, there are bright spots, strangely enough. Someone in the village found a patch of wild garlic near the stream. It's tough and stringy, but the smell brings tears to your eyes. Not from pain, but from memory. Garlic meant feast days, roasted fish, full bellies. You chew it raw and pretend. Another family made soup from dried nettles. It's prickly and tastes like boiled metal, but it's something green. Something that feels like it came from a time when people ate with joy, not desperation. You've also become an expert forager, or at least you've learned how to look at weeds with hope. Chickweed, dandelions, dock leaves. You never noticed how many weeds were edible until they became dinner guests. Your mother used to talk about hunger with a kind of grim pride. She remembered a famine from her girlhood, how they survived on onion peels and memories. She used to say, "When you're truly hungry, you'll eat your shadow if you can catch it." You didn't understand then. You do now. There's also a new trade in the village, recipes. Not written, of course. Nobody has parchment to waste, but whispered, swapped like secrets. Someone tells you that adding crushed acorns to broth gives it body. Another insists soaking beans in river water for 3 nights removes the bitterness. None of it works well, but trying gives you something to do. A ritual of pretending. You make a feast once a week. Just a slightly thicker soup. You light a candle. You sit straighter. You chew slower. It fools the mind, if not the stomach. There's a young boy down the lane who's made it his mission to find the tastiest twig. He brings different ones each day, nibbling the ends, reporting back like a food critic. Yesterday, he declared birch bark the creamiest. Everyone laughed, not because it was true, but because it reminded them they still could. Historians still debate whether medieval communities found resilience through shared meals, even awful ones. Some think these rituals of gathering helped ease the psychic toll. Others believe hunger bred only silence. In your case, it's both. Some nights, you eat in quiet companionship. Other nights, you turn your back so no one sees your tears. You chew slowly. You swallow hard. You lie about how full you feel. And then, when the fire dies down and the bowls are empty, you talk. Not about food. That would be cruel. You talk about rain. About what the stars looked like last summer. About the one time someone brought apples to market and the whole village smelled like joy. And just before sleep, you let yourself dream of something impossible. A table full of roasted roots, warm bread, crusty and soft, a stew thick with lentils and onions, cheese you can actually slice, a pie, not for survival, but for pleasure. You know it's a dream. You let it stay one, because for now you have bark stew, and each bite is a reminder. You're still here. The sickness always follows the hunger, not all at once. It begins as a whisper, someone coughing in the next cottage, a child who sleeps too long, an old man who doesn't wake up at all. But then it spreads, fast, like a shadow that stretches every time the light flickers. You know what it looks like. Hollow cheeks, fevered eyes, skin like wax paper stretched too thin. It's not dramatic, not like in the stories of plagues or pestilence. Famine sickness is quiet, slow, dull like an aching tooth. It sneaks into your house the same way the cold does, in the cracks, through the walls, under the blankets. The problem isn't just that you're hungry, it's that you're weak. And weakness is the open door that lets every sickness waltz in like it owns the place. When you don't eat enough, your body rebels. Your joints ache, your gums bleed, your skin bruises from a whisper. Cuts don't heal. Your hands shake when you try to hold a spoon, and not because of nerves. Historians still argue over the technical details, whether most medieval famine victims died from starvation itself or from secondary diseases like dysentery. typhus, or respiratory infections. But to you, it doesn't matter what they write in books, because what you see is this: fewer people waking up each morning, more bundles wrapped in cloth, more silence. It's not just the poor. Well, it's mostly the poor, but even the wealthier families aren't immune. The difference is they get sicker more politely, indoors with thicker blankets and slightly better food. But even privilege can't save the body when it's falling apart one cell at a time. You remember your sister's baby, plump one week, frail the next. The midwife said it was failure to thrive, a cruel phrase that makes it sound like a motivational issue. He stopped crying before he stopped breathing. There's a kind of famine death that isn't loud. It's someone sleeping more and more, eating less and less, until they simply stop both. You learn not to call out their name too often. You learn to prepare cloth in advance. You learn to dig graves when the ground is soft, even if no one has died, yet. And then there's the fever. The fever doesn't care that you're already starving. It comes anyway, curling your spine with chills, baking your skull until you hallucinate soups and rainstorms and long-lost loves. You sweat, you shiver, and when it breaks, you feel like you've crossed a battlefield with only your teeth intact. If you're lucky. Most aren't. The old woman across the path had a cough that sounded like rust peeling off a hinge. She tried to hide it at first. Then she couldn't. She stopped coming out. Her cat sat by the door for days. One morning, the door was open. The cat was gone, and no one speaks of it. People stop tending their gardens when they're sick. They stop sweeping. They stop caring. That's the part that gets to you, not the illness, but the unraveling of routines, the quiet erosion of will. You used to take pride in combing your hair. Now you don't bother. You can't remember when you last washed. You can't remember when you last laughed without it sounding like a cough. And yet, there are strange moments of tenderness. You saw a boy bring his sister a flower. Just a weed, really, but she clutched it like treasure. A woman spent half a day boiling clean water for her neighbor, even though her own pot was empty. You watched a man give his last blanket to a stranger. No words, just a gesture. Historians still debate whether famine drew people together or pushed them apart. Maybe it depends on the village. Maybe it depends on the day. But for every act of theft or hoarding, you've seen a hand reach out. You've held that hand. You've offered it too. The church says suffering purifies. That hunger makes the soul lighter, cleaner. You're not so sure. You'd trade 100 pure souls for a warm bowl of barley and a full night's sleep. Sometimes you think about the monks. They seem so clean, so calm. Their gardens, though smaller now, still grow something green. Their walls feel solid, protective. People say they've got remedies. They offer prayers instead. And sometimes, a thimble of wine. Wine doesn't cure anything, but it numbs. And numbing is the next best thing to healing. You heard a story about a woman who swore by boiled mint leaves as a cure. Another claimed nettle soup would chase the sickness out. Desperation makes everyone a doctor. You've tried them all. Some help. Most don't. But at least the ritual feels like action. Like maybe you can outrun the shadow just one more night. You lie awake again, feeling the tremble in your limbs, listening to your neighbor's ragged breathing through the wall. The night is so quiet you can hear a cough 3 houses down. Or was it a sob? You close your eyes and imagine health, not abundance, just normalcy. A day without shaking. A bowl of food that doesn't taste like boiled shoe. A morning when the children play again instead of just sitting still. You tell yourself it will come. Maybe not tomorrow, but maybe. You hear the bell first. Not the church bell, it's smaller, rounder, more metallic. A clear clink that cuts through the morning fog. It means the monks are opening their gates. That sound travels fast in your village. Faster than news, faster than gossip, faster than footsteps. Because when food is scarce and the cloister opens its doors, everyone listens. You grab your cloak, not for warmth, but because it has the deepest pockets, and you walk. The monastery sits just outside the village, nestled between two low hills and surrounded by a stone wall that feels like a secret. Inside, they have gardens, bees, and sometimes, if the whispers are true, cake. Not every day, and not for everyone. The monks live simply. That's what they say. But simplicity inside stone walls with dry grain and a fire in every room feels different than simplicity in a mud-floored cottage where even the rats are losing weight. You reach the gate just as a line begins to form. Quiet mostly. A few nods. A few tired eyes. No one pushes. No one speaks much. It's too early for hope. Today the monks are giving out broth. And bread ends. The broth is thin, nearly clear, with a few floating bits of something green. The bread is hard. You've learned to soak it in water or wine to soften it, if you're lucky enough to have wine. Most aren't. But it's food. It's something. The monk at the gate nods at you. You don't know his name, but you've seen him before. He's the one who hums, always humming, even as he stirs the soup pot. You wonder if he hums in his sleep. You take your bowl, nod your thanks, and step aside. The warmth seeps into your fingers like forgiveness. You sip slowly, letting each mouthful sit heavy in your belly. It's not much, but it tricks the body into believing things are okay. And for a few minutes they are. The monastery is strange that way. In a world that's falling apart in soft, moldy pieces, it feels untouched. Clean stone, steady fires, beeswax candles, and shelves. Shelves of herbs and remedies and wax-sealed jars that smell like forgotten summers. Historians still argue whether monasteries were truly safe havens during famine. Some were generous, others hoarded. Some saw it as charity, others as duty. A few even charged for soup, just not in coin. But this one, it gives. Not much. Not enough. But more than most. Of course, that generosity breeds something else. Envy. You've heard the rumors that a few villagers plan to sneak in after dark. Not to steal, just to borrow a sack of beans or a wheel of cheese. You don't think they will. But if they did, you wouldn't blame them. A few winters ago, a different monastery was raided. Not by soldiers or bandits, but by starving farmers. The monks tried to pray them away. It didn't work. By morning, the storehouse was empty, the altar dented, and the pews used for firewood. No one talks about it, but everyone remembers. Today, there's no riot. Just quiet sipping, a few murmured blessings, a child who laughs when a bee lands on his sleeve. You smile. It's the first one in days. The monks offer more than food. Sometimes they hand out cloth scraps or a pinch of dried thyme. Once, someone got a book, an old psalter, cracked and faded. She couldn't read it, but she carried it everywhere for weeks, like a talisman. You look around. People are thinner, faces more angular, hands twitch with cold or hunger or both. But they still show up, because this place, with its quiet rituals and humming monk, reminds you that not everything is lost. And that cake rumor? It's true. Last Easter, they made honey cake. Small squares, spiced and sweet. They gave it to the children first. You didn't get any, but the smell lingered in the village for days. People walked slower, just to savor it. A monk once told you that hunger purifies the soul. You nodded. Then you asked if cake does too. He laughed, a real laugh. It made the birds scatter. You finish your broth and hand back the bowl. The monk bows. You bow back. It's a strange kind of grace. On your way out, you see a few monks tending the herb garden. The mint is stubborn, even in this weather. The rosemary's browning. But the sage? It holds on. You watch them clip a few leaves, tuck them into a cloth, and walk toward the infirmary. For the sick, for the hopeful, for those not yet gone. You pass a boy on the path home. He's licking the inside of his bowl, eyes closed, pretending it's stew. You don't say anything, you just walk. The wind picks up, cold and sharp. You pull your cloak tighter, feel the broth settle inside you like a promise, and try not to think about tomorrow. because maybe, just maybe, the monks will open the gate again. The wind carries whispers again. But this time they aren't about food or monks or even moldy bread. They're about something older, something darker. The kind of whispers that lower themselves when children are near. The kind that shift blame from rain and rats to something with a face, or someone. You first hear it at the well. Two women speaking quietly as they fill buckets. One nods toward the woods. The other doesn't meet her gaze. Just mutters, "She never planted." Her garden still grows. The words hang there, sharp and wet. You don't need the whole sentence. You know what they mean. It's always the same. When famine grows teeth, people start looking for the one who fed while others starved. The one whose roof stayed dry. The one whose goat gave milk out of season. The one who didn't get sick. They call it luck. Then they call it something else. Witch. Historians still argue whether witch hunts truly surged during famines or whether they merely coincided with broader waves of panic. But here now, you don't need a chart. You can see it in the way people look at each other too long, in the way rumors cling like mud. It's not new. Your grandmother told stories. Women with herbs who disappeared. Midwives who helped too much. A widow whose chimney smoked when no one else had firewood. All vanished, or worse. In a world where everything has a cause, divine, demonic, or somewhere in between, someone has to carry the blame. And the weather can't answer back, so instead, they look for a face. You remember Marta? She lives alone in a crooked cottage with shutters that rattle even when the wind sleeps. Her yard grows things other yards don't. Lavender and frost, onions and dry soil. She speaks to her chickens like they understand her. Sometimes they seem to. You once traded her a ribbon for a jar of something green. She said it would help you sleep. It did. But now you're not sure you should tell anyone. Lately, the stairs have followed her like crows. A dropped spoon near her cottage, a rooster that didn't crow, a baby that wouldn't stop crying. All signs, apparently. You pass her on the road today. She nods. You nod back. But your nod feels different, heavier, like you're afraid of being seen nodding. And that's how it starts. Witchcraft, they say, spoils the grain, curses the weather, sours the cow's milk, brings fever to the cradle. It doesn't matter that science will one day dismiss it all. Here, now, fear doesn't wait for footnotes. You overhear a man say, "She was seen walking backwards through her garden." Someone else swears, "She hasn't aged since Pentecost." Another mutters, "I heard her speak Latin to a toad." The toad presumably hasn't commented. You want to dismiss it. You want to believe your village is better than that. But hunger carves holes in judgment. And when people are this empty, they fill themselves with suspicion. Even the church plays its part. The priest gave a sermon last week about temptation, unseen forces, the rot within. He didn't name names. He didn't have to. Everyone looked the same way. Still, some defend her. "She helped birth my son," one woman says. "She cured my fever with only a root and a rhyme," says another. But even gratitude sours when the cupboard is bare. That night, someone throws a stone through Marta's shutter. No one claims it. Everyone heard it. You don't sleep well, not because you think she's dangerous, but because you know others do. And desperation in numbers makes people bold in ways they'll regret come spring. If there is a spring, the whispers grow. A goat dies. Someone dreams of fire. A child says Marta stared too long. You feel it building, a tension in the air like lightning before it strikes. Historians still debate whether these moments were orchestrated or chaotic, whether local leaders fanned the flames or merely failed to stop them. But here, in your village, it's more like a tide. No one starts it. No one stops it. It just comes. You walk past Marta's cottage at dusk. A crow sits on the sill. She's inside, stirring something in a pot. The smell, strangely sweet, makes your stomach tighten. You think of saying something, of warning her, of telling her to run, but you don't. Because what if they see you? So you walk on, faster than before, letting the shadows close behind you. That night, the sky stays clear. No rain, no wind, just silence, the kind that arrives before something breaks. The rains returned. Not the drizzle, not the friendly kind that soaks into the soil and promises green shoots. These are heavy rains, relentless and loud, like the sky is trying to drown the earth. They've been falling for days now, maybe weeks. You've stopped counting. Calendars don't mean much when every day tastes the same. Damp bread, sour dreams, muddy everything. The roads are gone. Just ribbons of sludge now. Wagons sink. Boots vanish. The river has burst its banks again, dragging chunks of the village path downstream like it's tidying up. You watch it from your window. A rat floats by on a piece of bark like a tiny, miserable sailor. You don't laugh, because you know what this means. The famine is no longer your own. It's no longer just your village. Now it's bigger. It stretches beyond the hills, beyond the forests, across fields and fiefdoms and kingdoms. You've heard travelers speak of it in hushed tones, how towns far away are soaked through, starving, stuck, and now you've learned the name. You don't know the year in that precise way, but you've heard the stories. This is a year people will talk about, if there's anyone left to talk. The rains started early, the crops started late, and the grain, when it came, was black with rot. The wheat sagged, the oats curled, even the weeds gave up. Some said it was a curse, some said it was punishment, others just wept. Historians now call it the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317. You simply call it now. Food prices soared, then broke. A loaf of rye costs more than a day's labor. You've stopped thinking of meals and flavors or textures. Now it's about weight, calories, anything that fills the stomach without killing you outright. Your neighbor tried to boil beans that had turned gray. They swelled like balloons, popped, and made the house smell like rot and regret. They ate them anyway. You've heard of things, worse things, that in towns near the coast, people fight over fish bones, that in cities, guards catch thieves not stealing gold, but crusts, that on the road to Saint Malo, a man was found cooking something unmentionable. You tell yourself they're just stories, but then you hear about the burial pits. The churchyard is full. The priest has started a new plot at the edge of the woods. He says it's temporary, but you see the way he digs, like he knows he'll need it. They don't ring the bells for the dead anymore. There aren't enough hours in the day. A boy died last night. No one knows his name. His mother vanished 2 weeks ago. Some say she wandered into the bog. Some say worse. He'd been begging, then coughing, then quiet. He's in the new pit now. The famine touches everything. Even the rain feels heavier, colder. You wring your sleeves out every few hours. Your boots squelch. Your home stinks of mildew and animal breath and hopelessness. And yet, life continues. A woman still braids her daughter's hair in the mornings, even if there's no comb. A boy still practices carving animals from scraps of wood, even though no one buys them. A man still sharpens his knife, though there's nothing to cut but his memories. Historians still argue whether the famine changed society or merely revealed it, whether this event, so large, so wet, so merciless, shook kings and queens from their towers or passed beneath their windows like fog. You don't see kings. You see wet fields, slumped shoulders, empty stalls at market, a silence that settles over the village like a second skin. And yet, somehow you still walk. Your body hurts in strange places, knees, back, even your jaw from clenching too much. But your feet know the path, from cottage to field, to stream to home. One day the stream will rise too high to cross. One day the roof will leak too much to sleep beneath. One day the broth will be only water. But not today. Today you stand in the rain, watching it flatten what little is left of your garden. You touch the tiny green stalks that tried so hard to rise. You whisper something that isn't quite a prayer, and you hope, because even now, even in 1315, even in the worst rain of your life, there's still something in you that waits for sun. You hear the trumpet before you see the man. It's a weak sort of sound, wobbly, not very heroic, but unmistakably official. A royal herald, draped in wet velvet and trailing mud, has arrived in the village square with a scroll so damp it sags in his hands. He unrolls it anyway, tries to look important, tries to ignore the fact that his boots are sinking slowly into the sludge beneath him. The proclamation begins. It's full of flowery phrases and words you don't hear often. Provision, relief, common good. There's something about distributing grain, something about mercy, something about the king's deep concern for his loyal subjects. You glance at the others gathered around. No one cheers. A few cough. One woman mutters, "Too late." The boy next to you is chewing on a stick. You're not sure he's listening at all. It's not that you don't appreciate the gesture. It's just that words don't fill bellies. Historians still argue whether royal responses to famine were genuine or performative, whether kings truly tried to help or simply wanted to quell unrest, whether proclamations like this ever actually reached the people in time. You can answer that one. Number not in time. You remember the last decree, something about price caps. It arrived just after the baker had already sold his last sack of flour to a passing nobleman for a silver goblet. The cap was technically enforced, on an empty shelf. The problem is scale. The king rules over miles of land, thousands of villages. His maps don't show your chicken coop. His advisors don't know your cow hasn't mooed in 3 days. To them, famine is an abstraction. Lines on parchment, numbers in a ledger, a headache. To you, it's a child's ribs showing, a tooth falling out from scurvy, a night where you chew boiled grass and pretend it's soup. Still, there's a part of you, small, tired, but stubborn, that wants to believe. That maybe the grain carts will arrive, that maybe someone up high will finally look down and see what's really happening. The herald promises shipments by fortnight's end. Someone behind you says, "That's 2 weeks." You do the math in your head and realize you might not last that long. Then the herald hands out tokens, slips of wax-stamped parchment that entitle you to a portion of relief grain. You take one more out of habit than hope. It's already damp. You wonder if it's edible. Later back at home, you hang it over the fire to dry. It curls into a strange shape, like a warning. You think of the time a merchant sold sacks of grain laced with pebbles, claimed it was for weight. He vanished before anyone could find him again. Maybe he was never real. You think of the king, wherever he is, in a castle with dry stone and bright tapestries. You try to picture him worrying over your hunger. You fail. But the decrees keep coming. This week, grain redistribution. Next week, penalties for hoarding. The week after, public prayers. You attend the prayer meeting. Everyone does. Not because you think it'll help, but because it feels like something. The priest drones on about divine mercy, about faith in times of trial, about patience. You want to ask him how many days patience can be boiled into stew, but you don't. Instead, you kneel on the cold stone floor, close your eyes, and try to imagine the king as a person, with hands, with ears, with a stomach that ever growls. You picture him lifting a spoonful of watery barley broth and saying, "More salt, perhaps." You open your eyes and realize you're crying, quietly, just enough for your cheeks to feel cold. Historians still debate how much influence royal policy had on everyday life, whether monarchs truly changed the course of a famine or simply rearranged the deck chairs on a sinking ship. The truth is, it depends. On timing, on intention, on how many oxen get stuck in the mud between the castle and your door. You go back to the village square every few days, checking the horizon. No carts. The herald is gone, left without fanfare. Maybe stuck in another village, delivering another promise. You still have the token. It sits folded in your pocket. Soft now, worn from your fingers, touching it like a talisman. You'd burn it for warmth if it would catch. Instead, you whisper to it sometimes, just in case. Tell him we're still here. You see it first in the children. Not the hunger, you've already seen that, but the stillness. Kids who once ran between huts, scaring chickens, sneaking apples, wrestling in the mud. Now, they just sit, legs pulled up, eyes half-lidded, cheeks hollow. That spark of mischief is gone. You see it in their drawings, too, those faint scratches on bits of bark or scraps of charcoal on wall beams. Once, they drew animals, carts, games. Now it's bowls. Bread, a piece of meat the size of a dream. The famine doesn't just eat food, it eats time, and memory, and growth. Historians still argue about the long-term effects of medieval famines, not just on the fields or the markets, but on the people themselves, on generations. Some say it stunted growth, others that it changed customs, marriages, births. You don't need a scroll to tell you that. You see it with your own eyes. The marriages have slowed. Who wants to start a family on a stomach that's already 2 days behind? Babies come fewer and frailer, cries quieter. You attend fewer baptisms now, more funerals. A young woman down the lane postponed her wedding twice, once for a flood, the second time because her groom was too weak to walk to the chapel. Now they just sit together outside his mother's cottage, not talking, sharing a crust. You pass them and nod. They nod back. It's a language of its own. Still alive, still waiting. Old songs are changing too. You hear the children hum lullabies with different lyrics, not about lambs or fairies, but food. One version replaces every animal with something to eat. Twinkle Twinkle becomes Tasty Tasty, an ode to stew. It would be funny if it weren't so sad. You see the toll on the elders, once keepers of tradition, of stories. They're quieter now, not because they've forgotten, but because no one asks. And maybe it hurts too much to remember better winters. There's an old man who used to sit by the well every morning, whittling wooden animals for the children. Now he carves firewood, and when he talks, it's only to himself. He lost 2 sons last winter, one to fever, one to silence. You used to gather around the fire to hear stories. Now, when there is a fire, it's just for heat. The stories feel like luxuries, frivolous things best saved for a world with full bellies. And yet, every now and then, one slips through. A tale of a boy who tricked a wolf with a loaf of rye, a girl who grew an apple tree from a single seed and fed a whole village. You catch pieces while passing by doors, leaning in at windows, ears tuned like old dogs waiting for something familiar. Even the church bells sound different, slower, heavier, like they've been filled with wet wool and grief. The priest's sermons are shorter, fewer parables, more silence, as if even God's tired of hearing his own voice. One afternoon, a cart rolls into the village, not grain, but books. A traveling friar, cheeks red from the wind, offers stories instead of bread. People gather, not many, but enough. He reads aloud from a tattered volume, the words curling into the air like steam. It's about saints, martyrs, miracles. None of it seems real, but you listen anyway, because sometimes a story is what keeps the cold away, just for a little while. Later, you find a piece of twine and make a doll for your cousin's little girl. She doesn't smile, but she holds it tight, like it matters, like it's real. You remember what life used to be, not perfect, not even easy, but full. Music in the evenings, dancing in the square, the way your mother's hair smelled like lavender in June, the way apples snapped when you bit into them. You wonder what the children now will remember. Not apples, not dancing, just the scraping sound of empty bowls. Historians talk about the post-famine world, as if one day everything simply ends and resets. But you know better. Even when the grain returns, the fear will stay. The caution, the hoarding, the hunger behind the eyes, because when the belly empties too long, the soul learns to expect it. And some things don't fill back up. Not quickly, not ever. It's late. The wind has settled. The fire is a whisper. And the story you hear tonight isn't told. It's passed, like a secret, from mouth to mouth in the quiet spaces where truth hides. These are the stories no one should have to believe. You sit on the dirt floor beside your neighbor, whose hands tremble when she speaks, not from cold, but from memory. She doesn't meet your eye, just stares into the embers, voice low. There was a man, she says, who boiled bark in belts, and when they ran out, things that didn't belong in pots. You nod. Not because you know the man, but because you know the hunger. Stories like this always begin the same. A family too proud to beg. A cellar that stays cold. A child that vanishes. The stew that tastes different. A silence that follows. You've heard the rumors. Whole towns digging shallow graves at night. Parents burying bundles smaller than they should be. Villagers closing their doors not because they're afraid of thieves, but because they're afraid of neighbors. There's one tale about a baker in a city, not yours, thank God, who sold pies no one could explain. They say he used what he had. They say no one asked questions. They say the smell lingered. You once told yourself it couldn't be true. People aren't like that. But now you understand what starvation does. It peels back layers, scrapes bone, dulls everything but instinct. Historians still argue which of these stories are fact, which are folklore. Some insist famine cannibalism was rare, extreme, isolated. Others believe it was quietly widespread, hidden beneath shame and church bells. You don't need a scholar to know shame is good at keeping secrets. There's another story, from 2 valleys over. A boy found wandering alone, couldn't speak, just pointed to a forest. His mouth was red. He never explained. And then there are the burial mistakes. A young woman brought to the grave, body thin, eyes closed. But when the gravedigger turned, he heard a cough, faint, dry. But there, they pulled her out, wrapped her warm, fed her broth. She lived, for 2 more weeks. Now the villagers poke the bodies before they bury them. A little shake, a nudge, just in case. You don't speak these stories during the day. The sun burns them away. But at night, when the wind slips through the cracks and the fire dies low, they come crawling back, not to scare but to remind. Remind you what people have done, what they still might do, what you might do. There's one more tale. A moss loaf. Sounds harmless, until you realize it's made from floor scrapings, ground with clay, baked hard as rock and soaked in river water until it softens enough to chew. Barely food, but something to hold, to share, to believe in. You tried it once. It tasted like dirt and memory. You ate the whole thing. Because stories don't fill you. Not really, but they carry you. They tell you you're not alone. That someone else somewhere boiled the bark, dug the grave, swallowed the shame, and somehow woke up the next morning. So tonight, as you lie in the dark, you hold these stories close, not to judge, not to fear, but to understand. That hunger changes rules, and mercy sometimes looks like silence. The rains stop. Not with fanfare or sunbeams, not with choirs or clarity, just absence. You wake one morning and notice the silence first. No dripping from the eaves, no steady plink against the roof. The sky is still gray, but dry. For the first time in months, your sleeves stay crisp past breakfast. And just like that, the village begins to breathe again, tentatively, like someone peeking through a door after a storm. The mud begins to harden. You can see the shapes of old footprints preserved like fossils. Carts start to move again, creaking cautiously along the path. The fields, still a mess. But now they're just a mess, not a disaster. Someone dares to say it aloud. Maybe it's over. You don't reply. Not because you disagree, but because hope feels fragile, like a candle in the wind. Better not to jinx it. Still, something shifts. The priest smiles during Mass. A boy hums as he draws swirls in the dust. The cows don't exactly moo with joy, but they shuffle less like ghosts. And your neighbor's goat? It gave half a cup of milk yesterday. Enough to share. It's not abundance, not even close, but it's change. And change tastes different. The lord of the manor, remember him? He reappears, not with a feast or grain carts, of course, just a speech. Something about recovery, resilience, rebuilding, the usual. He looks thinner, though, less polished. Even the rich don't always escape unscathed. And then the monks open their gates again, this time with green things, tiny shoots, onion bulbs, seed packets, precious and odd-smelling. A gift from another abbey, they say, or a miracle, depending who you ask. You kneel in the dirt that afternoon, planting with fingers that still ache. The soil crumbles, clumpy but warm, a good sign, maybe. Historians still debate what people learned from great famines. Did they change farming methods? Rethink land use? Diversify crops? Some say yes. Others point out how quickly the old ways return when the rain stops. You suspect it's both. That memory and habit wrestle with each other, and survival usually wins. Your body remembers hunger even when your belly is full. You still ration, still save crusts, still dream of bark stew with phantom seasoning. That doesn't go away overnight, neither do the stories. People still whisper about the famine years, but softer now, as if putting the right tone to pain might keep it at bay. You catch fragments in the market. Remember the goat soup? When my shoes boiled? The night we burned the last chair? They laugh, sort of. That strange, sideways laughter of people who made it through and know they shouldn't have. A wedding happens, not a lavish one. No feast, no dowry, no ribbons. Just hands held, vows muttered, and a pot of weak soup shared like champagne. You cry anyway. Then someone plays music, a fiddle, shrill but determined. And for a few minutes people dance, slow, offbeat, but they move. You move too. The children, oddly, adapt fastest. Their bodies rebound, bellies fill out, cheeks return. But their eyes? Still watchful. You see it. That glance toward the pantry, the ear tilted toward silence. They know things they shouldn't. They always will. There's a phrase people start using, before the hunger. It becomes a marker, a line. Everything else is divided, before and after. You find yourself telling stories, even when you think no one's listening, about the way the river rose, about the rat on the raft, about the token from the king you still keep in a drawer. You show the children the weeds that kept you alive. This one's good boiled. That one not unless you want to see ghosts. They listen. And that, more than anything, feels like healing. You walk past the old granary. It's been cleaned out. A new roof. The smell of fresh timber. Maybe this time it will stay dry. Maybe. You don't go in. Not yet. Instead, you sit on your doorstep, warming your hands around a bowl of real soup, real carrots, real beans. You chew slowly, carefully, as if it might vanish, but it doesn't. And as night falls, cool and still, you hear something you haven't in a long time. Birds, tiny chirps from the trees, a lullaby from the sky. You close your eyes, not to forget, but to remember without pain, because yes, the famine is over. But the memory feeds you in a different way now. So here you are, listener. You've walked the mud and the hunger. You've chewed bark. You've waited for rain to end and watched the sun return with trembling hands. You've seen what people become when there's nothing left, and what they hold on to when they have nothing else. Let it go now. Let it all soften. Close your eyes. Imagine warm bread in your hands. Not fancy bread, just enough. Crusty, warm, made with patience. Hear the sound of a fire popping gently in the hearth. Outside, the wind moves through trees like a lullaby. No storms, no proclamations. Just the hush of night and the heartbeat of something alive. Breathe slowly. The famine is gone. You're safe now. Let your body feel the weight of blankets, not worry. Let your thoughts wander to fields growing green again, to laughter in doorways, to milk warming in a pot. Nothing spectacular, just ordinary peace, the kind you earn, the kind you remember. And if the hunger ever tries to creep back into your dreams, your breath, your bones, remind it, you made it, you endured, and now you rest. Sleep now, you're home. End of script. Sweet dreams.